Hey everyone, this is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and today we will be looking at your horoscopes for the month of August. I am joined today by my colleague and friend Alex Amorosi and Dana Solara. If you haven't met Dana yet, she is a new co-host on the show with Alex. We invited her on a couple months ago. She joined us for the first time last month, and we just loved it. And thank you all for such a nice, warm welcome that you gave Dana as well. So really glad to have her back today. We have a list of transits. I'll go over them with you, and Alex and Dana and I will share our thoughts about the transits overall, and then we'll go Aries through Pisces. And the three of us will be alternating and also offering commentary on each other's takes as we go along. So before we get into it, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. We're trying to get to 70,000 subscribers by the autumn equinox. Feels like I don't know, it's a big goal, but I feel like we can get there, especially considering that we have been looking at the analytics and finding out that there are tens of thousands of people who listen to this show regularly who are not yet subscribed. And so if it doesn't matter to you, I mean, if you're someone who's like, I don't subscribe, that's cool. But if you're someone who doesn't mind subscribing, it really does help us grow. So click the subscribe button. We'd like to hear from you. Your like also really helps the channel to grow. You can find transcripts of any of these daily talks on the website, nightlightastrology.com. And if we take you over there right now, I want to show you some of the events that are coming up. Click on Live Talks under the Events tab, and you will see that August's next webinar is called The Eighth House, the Place of Karmic Debts. That's on August 22nd. I'll be taking a look at some of the classical meanings of the Eighth House, why the Eighth House has a little bit of a bad reputation, why we don't really need to be afraid of it, and also why this house is so intimately related to karmic debts and meaningful karmic exchanges with other people. In September, I'll be doing a talk on Venus through the 12 signs, looking at Venus's 12 love languages. This is really handy if you want to understand Venus in your birth chart at a deeper level, and maybe even look at the kind of synastry between your Venus and maybe someone else's Venus. Also, on October 17th, the October talk is called The Myth of Astrological Compatibility. What everybody gets wrong about the astrology of relationships. This is my chance to get on my soapbox about some of the stuff that I think is absolute BS out there about the astrology of relationships. And I'll give you my thought about the thing that actually works. I have a really strong take on this, and I've never taught it. I've never taught it before. And I was like, yeah, it's time to teach it. So I think you guys will enjoy that talk as well. When you register for any of these talks, you get the link to attend live. If you can't make it live, you get the recording afterwards. So hope to see you all there for some of that. And on that note, I'm really glad to bring Alex and Dana back for this month's horoscopes.
Woo.
Hey guys.
Oh, we're both doing double waves.
we all are.
Jazz hands.
Yes, hands for everyone. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad to have you guys back. How was July for both of you?
Whew.
Oh,
I
liked it.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty chill for me. I don't know. I'm feeling Saturn moving back toward my ascendant ruler. So I was sort of just enjoying the chill from it not approaching. But July's been okay for me. How about you, Alex?
It's been eventful, but not bad. That Uranus-Mars conjunction really stirred some stuff up, but it was just typical Uranus, unexpected, got to deal with this type of thing that would come up really fast. But Saturn is backing off of a square to my sun. So July has progressively felt a little bit less like the pressure is starting to come off a little bit, which has felt nice. But it's been erratic for sure. It's settling now.
Yeah, I had Uranus on my ascendant with Mars. And so I had a nervous breakdown. No, I almost lost my mind. No, I mean, it was crazy because I would say, I had some migraines. I fell down the stairs at one point, which was really scary, but I ended up being okay. And then we had a massive, massive tree, like house destroying tree size, fall 10 yards short of our house during the middle of the night. And destroyed our fence. Like we have like a property line fence, and it absolutely destroyed our fence. But it landed like 10 yards short of our house. And when I woke up, it was the Mars-Uranus conjunction almost exactly on my ascendant. And I thought it was interesting because my ascendant ruler is in the fourth house. And there's also a bit of a square still going on with my ascendant ruler in the fourth house of home and property. And I was like, whoa, that got my attention. And I feel like the month was way more. It's funny how when you have a big transit going on and then the astrology is pinging off, like there's a lot of astrology in a month when you also have an outer planet somewhere hitting your natal Venus or your ascendant or whatever. It's like those are the biggest months. And so for me, July was like completely nutty. Like I can't say there was one normal. Yeah, it was really wild. There's a lot of really unexpected and erratic things. Saffron, who is one of our staff, and she's a big part of the Roots and Spheres monthly moon circle, she said sometimes when you're going through these transits, a month like July may not hit you personally. Maybe it's not hitting anything in your birth chart in a big way, but you will. It's sort of like if you're driving down the street. She actually had this experience driving down the street. And she was just being a very cautious driver because of Mars Uranus. And like one intersection up, she saw someone just get T-boned. And she was like, okay, if I had been not slowing down, could that have been me? She doesn't know. Who knows? But she said, sometimes you just sort of, you see the gods at work and you just sort of tip your cap and are like, bless everyone involved. I hope everyone's doing okay. And it's sort of like that. Like, I feel like for people in July who didn't have it hit personally, you probably saw it peripherally in other people's lives that you know. And sometimes that's how it shows up too. So I don't know if you guys had any experience of seeing those intense transits of July play out in other people's lives, but that was one way that a lot of people have been reflecting on seeing July play out as well.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I put in my newsletter this month, like anything that's going on in July was under the umbrella of that conjunction in some way, shape, or form. It was just it would the build to it, the exact, you know, and up to the exact conjunction. And I think it's an interesting way to look at astrology, where it's just like you realize that there are layers within layers, and that every other transit that was happening had a little tinge of, you know, Mars Uranus. And I think it's interesting too, Adam. You know, I had this experience too in my life with some stuff that was going on with my family where, you know, like the tree falling, it's like a holy shit moment. But in Venus's sign, it was like something will, you know, like, you know, if you're just like, there's like something that just seems to stave it off or move it off, you know. I don't know if that happened for everybody, but that was the experience I was having. Like, whoa, oh, okay. Whoa, but okay. You know, harmony returns in some way.
Yeah. I mean, it was really handy that there was reception with Venus, a benefic.
Yeah.
The ruler of good fortune configured with that Mars Uranus. Yeah. Certainly, I felt like that was part of the like near miss motif. And I had several people in my life that I know go through really turbulent experiences in friendships or relationships that were like also near misses, where it ended up being okay. But I was like, is everyone in my life about to get divorced? Like friends and people and, you know, extended relations and so forth. I was like, whoa, this is gnarly. And also 3 transits to Pluto, Mercury, Venus, and the Sun, all opposing Pluto. There was a lot of like stuff that came up that was just like, oh, wow, I didn't see that coming, or I didn't know that was in there, or whatever. So August is a really different month. I want to put the chart up on the screen, and let's start taking a look at the transits of August now that we are we've taken a second to at least reflect on July. But here's August 1st. So what we're going to be focusing on for your horoscopes today are the transits that are mostly taking place across the mutable sign axis. That would be, excluding Sagittarius, it's really Virgo, Gemini, and Pisces. And we can see at the start of the month, Mercury is starting to retrograde in Virgo, a very well-dignified Mercury retrograde. I have to say that makes me a little hopeful that this won't be super nutty. You know, maybe some really productive things happening there. But then we also see Venus entering her fall in the sign of Virgo with a long drawn-out opposition to Venus taking place. And then we are going to see the conjunction of Mars and Jupiter in Gemini about the middle of the month, with both of those planets immediately squaring Saturn in Pisces. And let me just draw this out in case you can't see it, right? And then we've got Venus heading into the opposition. Mercury's just finished. He's going to dip back into Leo for the rest of its retrograde, but a significant portion of the beginning of the retrograde is taking place in Virgo. And that retrograde is that Mercury retrograde, of course, is ruling the Mars-Jupiter conjunction and effectively playing a big role in the Jupiter-Saturn square. Because you look at the chain of rulerships, Jupiter-Saturn is a huge moment in a mundane sense. It's a cycle that we're going to talk a little bit about before we get into horoscopes that we want to make sure we understand. But when the ruler of the Jupiter part of the Jupiter-Saturn square is Mercury retrograding, that's a big deal. That really suggests a pretty significant change within the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic. As the month goes on, we also see Venus getting into this interesting dynamic where Venus is squaring Jupiter, the benefic, while opposing Saturn, the malefic. That's an interesting dynamic because when you have a Jupiter-Saturn square that Venus is suddenly hitting or pinging off from, that also tones the Jupiter-Saturn square pretty significantly. Let's see. And then I think we said Mars can join Jupiter, Venus opposite Saturn, Jupiter square Saturn, Venus square Jupiter, the Mercury retrograde. Venus being debilitated is also a big deal. We have to understand what that means. So let's talk a little bit about the astrology of the month before we get into horoscopes. What stands out to you guys when you look at this? Like, what are some of your thoughts about the month of August? How would you summarize or capture some of the big themes? Maybe Dana, you could start us.
Sure. The first thing I noticed when I looked at this month was the way that Mercury and Venus are working together. As soon as Mercury stations retrograde, Venus enters Virgo. And then as soon as Mercury turns direct, Venus trines Pluto, I believe, and then enters Libra. So I found that really interesting, especially because Venus is in her fall here. It feels like Mercury and Venus are working together in an interesting way. And I'm also fascinated, sorry, Alex, I'll say one more thing and then I'll let you talk.
No, please.
I'm interested in the fact that both the benefics are in places where they don't naturally do as well as they normally do. It feels like almost contrarian, like we're going to be saying no to a lot of things, especially with Mercury retrograde.
Yeah.
I love that. The Jupiter-Saturn dynamic really stands out to me. And I have a personal example that just happened literally about 2 hours ago. I had a break in the middle of the day. I went to the gym and my trainer sent me a new core workout to do. And so I'm playing the video of it and I'm like, oh yeah, well, I can do this. Like, no big deal. Like, it doesn't look that hard, blah, blah, blah. Like, very Jupiter Mars, right? Like, I'm kind of like thumping my own chest. And it was the hardest. I could barely move. Like, I was falling over the floor. I was like sweating all over the place. I almost killed the lady next to me. And it was just like, it was so embarrassing. And I thought, like, this is such a Jupiter Mars dynamic square Saturn, where it's like, you have this sort of bravado and sort of a little bit hopped up on your own like intellectual or physical capability. And then Saturn comes along and says, yeah, but you haven't ever done these exercises before, Alex. You need to like practice this. You need to go back to basics. You need to take this slower. You need to slow your roll a little bit. And I feel like that will be an interesting theme because, Jupiter in Gemini is already so experimental and quick. You add Mars to it, it's really like, pouring fuel on the fire. I think humility and recognizing you can be excited with humility this month is really important. And with a sense of staying grounded and stable and not forgetting your roots or your base, your foundations would be really important.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great thoughts. One of the things that comes to my mind is there is so much. I mean, 3 of the major playing planets, Jupiter, Mars, and Venus, are all in Mercury's signs. And again, both benefics debilitated in Mercury's sign. The reason for this, if I had to put it, in the broadest archetypal terms, is that Jupiter and Venus are all about bringing things together and harmonizing and building unities and wholes and cohesiveness and flow. And Mercury's, I don't mean to say that Mercury is like some kind of villain, but Mercury is much more deconstructive by nature. It's like Mercury likes to pull things apart and question things and examine and scrutinize even. And so I feel like one of the themes of the month has to do with scrutinizing things, looking at things and seeing what works and doesn't work. And there's a sort of a very critical eye, almost like, having someone come in and evaluate the design style or aesthetic of your home. It's like a very vulnerable, fragile place to have someone come into your home and just be like, well, the color doesn't really work here, or like blah, blah, blah. And so I could see this month being one where there's a lot of really good constructive feedback, but there's also maybe some disappointment because it could feel like a little bit of a killjoy, or almost like we want to be seeing things come together. We want to be building things, but there's this kind of pull it all apart, take it all down theme that could sort of get in the way.
For sure.
I want to talk. Go ahead,
sorry,
Alex.
go ahead. No, I was just going to say really quick, Adam, that, it's also look for the background players of Uranus and Pluto to still be pretty active this month. And, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, when we get to the Jupiter-Saturn square, which is opening the conjunction, the opening square of the conjunction that happened at 0 Aquarius, where Pluto is right now. And also, in Mercury's retrograde, the Cazimi with the sun is a degree off from a square to Uranus. And Mercury's making, 3 passes at Uranus. So, really looking at those outer planetary background themes of, the cathartic, purgative quality of Pluto, and then the sort of surprising, erratic, sometimes very liberating and freeing quality of Uranus, are sort of programs operating in the background too this month.
Yeah, I think it's remarkable that I left this up because I wanted to point out that when Jupiter and Saturn square one another, it's under the full moon in Aquarius, and the full moon is configured in an exact square with Uranus, and Mercury retrograde is just coming off the square to Uranus too. So it is a very lively full moon in August, still very Uranian, still very much in line, in my opinion, with the theme of the year, which is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So yeah, I think it's interesting that Venus is configured inner fall intimately within the sphere of the full moon and so forth as well. So it's it's a busy month. I want to talk a little bit about before we get in. This month needs a little bit more unpacking before we just get into horoscopes, because we want to understand what we're actually looking at. If we go back to the December of 2020 was the conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn at 0 Aquarius. What's interesting is that we have Pluto retrograding over that point at the same time that since that conjunction, we now have the first hard aspect in the synodic cycle between Jupiter and Saturn. So to my mind, there's a lot of places you could look at in your birth chart this month to understand the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic, because it's spread out across 3 mutable signs that are really engaged. But it's also the opening square coming off from the conjunction at 0 Aquarius, where Pluto is now located. So you could also look at the Aquarius house in your chart this month. But with Jupiter-Saturn, one of the classic ways of thinking about Jupiter-Saturn cycles before we had all of the outer planets thousands of years ago was in terms of the cycles of birth and death and regeneration of major societal structures. So when you think of Jupiter, traditionally, you think of all of the major institutions of a society that help create cohesion, virtue, justice, law, equality, goodness, whether that's the law. And these are all, ideally speaking, because we always fall short as humans, but the law, government, education, religion, these are all Jupiterian. Now, to the extent that institutions are mortal, just like humans are mortal, they go through constant revision. And so the Jupiter-Saturn cycles were associated with the revision as well as the death and the reconfiguring of social institutions. So as Jupiter and Saturn are going through a square, we are looking at, not just right now, but there's consecutive, like December, we have another square. And then later on in 2025, we have one more. So it's a long process. But right now, we're really looking at a moment of reconfiguring structures in our lives. The structures that ideally grant us a sense of unity and cohesion, whether that's philosophically or morally, or that's like your outlook on life, or if it's the organizational structures that are at work in your home or your office job or whatever the case might be. you're going to see that they are going through a moment of being checked or challenged, being revised or edited, shifting or evolving in some way, dying and being reborn in some way. And it's a kind of critical moment, a moment of challenge, and a moment where there could be frustrations that come up because this is a square. So let's just remember that the Jupiter-Saturn square is not just any other planetary square, because it's two very slow-moving planets who have this very specific history behind them in mundane astrology. No doubt we're not doing mundane, like, collective historical astrology on this show, but you will see this in the news over the next year. You're going to see this happening in various ways in various institutions and the form of government and so on and so forth. So anyway, I wanted to say a little bit about that before we get into it today, because the Jupiter-Saturn horoscopes, it's really important to sort of qualify what they mean and what they're all about. You guys want to add anything?
I don't, except for when we talk about horoscopes. So I feel like that covered it for me, but Alex might.
I mean, I don't have much to add to that. I think it's really important to understand that cycle, especially looking at Jupiter. I think Saturn in a water sign may have the tougher time here. Pluto's in an air sign, Jupiter's in an air sign. Jupiter and Saturn are now forming the conjunctions for about 181 years in air signs. You could see the impulse to deconstruct and decentralize and look into things be very strong. But Saturn, there's an emotional attachment to something, or a feeling of not wanting to feel disparate or disconnected and drawing back, that could feel, I don't know, like a tension this month.
Yeah, and there's like Jupiter. I feel like Jupiter in Gemini, along with Uranus about to enter Gemini next year, is very experimental. Let's try this. Yeah. Let's try that. Saturn in Pisces says, yeah, but what about this obligation? Or what about this greater emotional need? Or what about, it's like someone who has a technology and someone who says that'll price too many people out. You know what I mean? Like, well, so, and then someone might say, well, like, I have this new idea, and someone says, well, that won't work for me. And you say, well, I have to set a boundary, and I can't make everything about you, or I can't make everything about this need or this burden that someone is using as a way to try and block some kind of progress or so forth. So like there's a lot of ways of looking at that Jupiter-Saturn square. But anyhow, we've labored these transits enough, I think. So let's get started. We'll begin. I've got Aries on the ascendant. So we're going to start here. And again, what we're really focusing on this month for all of you are the transits taking place across these three houses, which we outlined at the start of the episode today. Really, these are the houses and topics that you're going to see things moving through in the month ahead. So that's what we'll each be focusing on for you. Dana's going to start us off with Aries.
Okie dokie. So Aries risings, I actually want to start with the fact that Mercury is going to be retrograding in your 6th house. And I know Mercury retrograde is it's a normal phenomenon, right? It happens like 3 times a year. But because Mercury is ruling Gemini and Virgo, it's important. That's where Venus is, right? And that's where the Mars-Jupiter conjunction is going to happen. So I think it's important we think about this Mercury retrograde and the fact that Venus and Mercury are going to kind of change hands. They're going to kind of high five and switch spots. And then Venus will stay in Mercury's sign for the rest of the month. So Mercury retrograde is happening in your 6th house of work and health, and it's going to retrograde back into your 5th house of pleasure, creativity, and children. So for me, this Mercury retrograde, wherever Virgo and Leo are in your chart, and obviously for Aries, this is going to be your 6th and 5th house. These topics are going to come together somehow. And so for my Aries rising people, I'm wondering about what you're rethinking in the way you approach your health and your work. And because Venus is here and Venus is in her fall, it feels like you're trying to be very dedicated to your work. There's a standard you're setting. I'm thinking about someone who is starting a new workout routine and they're gung-ho and they're following it to the T. But if you've ever done that, you know that can kind of go too far pretty quickly. And I think that general idea is the thing we want to watch out for with Venus and Virgo, is it can go too far kind of quickly, especially when we're trying to hold ourselves to a standard. And that's what Venus and Virgo wants to do. It sees the aesthetic ideal as perfection. And so when we're talking about your health and your work, you just want to keep that in mind. Now, Venus is going to be opposing Saturn in your 12th house. Saturn in your 12th house, I would say, has been forcing you to probably deal with questions, thoughts, and realities that you'd rather not, because that's the 12th house, right? And Saturn wants you to be responsible. So that's been going on since March of last year, but now Venus is going to oppose Saturn. So I wonder about what this Mercury retrograde and Venus stuff is bringing up for you, and how that sort of creates tension or clashes with all of the behind the scenes subconscious work that you're doing. Now, if you've been working with Saturn in Pisces in a more conscious way, you might be really ready for this because you might be sort of getting your inner world in order, and you might have already been doing some of that. So what comes up with Venus and Virgo might actually, you might be ready for it, right? But I also couldn't help but think about isolation and feeling isolated. I get that sense with Venus and Virgo that Venus and Virgo, it's sort of self-sacrificing. It wants to sort of do everything for everybody. And when you've got Saturn in the 12th house, where it already, kind of does really well, it's the 12th house is like Saturn. I think that the potential for feeling alone in your experience is real. So I would encourage my Aries rising people to lean on your friends and to talk about the things that are going on with you. So that kind of takes us to the Mars and Jupiter conjunction. Fun fact, I have this natally in Gemini. I'm not an expert, obviously. This is something I'm learning about for the rest of my life, but I'm excited to talk about it. So we know that Jupiter is in detriment in Gemini. So this is a critical Jupiter. It's a Jupiter that decides what it wants through a process of elimination. And when you have Mars here too, I'm going to speak up. I'm going to say what I think is right. I'm going to fight for what I want. And so in the third house, I definitely could see this being about communication, obviously, like speaking up, not just because it's Gemini, but because we're in the third house. Thinking about your daily routines and rituals. What are you willing to do differently? And it's weird to think about courage in like your daily routines and rituals, like having the courage to brush your teeth every day or something like that. But I think it does take courage. And I'm talking about Mars. I think it does take courage to do things differently than you've been doing them, especially when we've got a 12th house influence that can kind of be this energy of undoing, right? So it's having the courage to step out of the things that you've always done and do them differently for your own good and your own benefit, and not because it's going to help other people, but because it's what you need. And so that's what I'm seeing here.
Awesome. Alex, you want to add anything?
Not too much. I was just thinking, along those lines, Dean, I often think of Jupiter as ceremony and ritual, and Gemini, and Mercury rule signs often are very skeptical of that sort of thing, of there's a deconstructive quality to ceremony or ritual, like a little nose up at it, and I think that there might be something, to look at, maybe just phrasing what you said in a different way I was thinking about it, but like the idea of looking at the sort of rituals of your everyday life and maybe wanting to change those really, really quickly. And then Saturn in the 12th house being like, yeah, but there's something here right in the back of your subconscious that's not quite allowing that to change. And maybe there's something to look at there, that there's a reason that break is on. But yeah, I love that. That's beautiful analysis.
One of the things that stands out to me about this this particular horoscope is for Aries. When I look at Jupiter, Saturn in the 3rd and the 12th, one of the things that I think could happen is the calling into question of a very specific and maybe very old way of seeing the world. The Jupiter in Gemini in the 3rd house square to Saturn in the 12th is like, the way that I see the world isn't the only way of seeing it, or the way that how I experience truth is being called into question. There are different perceptions available, or a different lens through which to see or understand yourself or the world. And I feel like underlying unconscious issues that are related to perception and truth, and how you understand what's real or not, what's true or not, how you evaluate or judge or discern between what's like valuable or good for you or not. I could see those kinds of things being called into question in some really like acute ways that also maybe have relationship ramifications where they somehow filter into relationships, whether that's romantic or work relationships, or it's kind of like, I wouldn't be surprised to see Aries folks sort of going, I've never seen it this way before. Something like that.
Love that.
All right, let's move on. Thank you, Dana. That was a great one.
Thank you.
Let's move to Taurus. So Alex is going to take our fixed signs for the day, and I'm just going to highlight these mutable houses that we see everything happening across here for you.
All right, so I see, I look at that Jupiter-Mars conjunction in the second house, and all I can think of is like the impetus to get some money. There's something about, like was it? You guys ever watch Parks and Rec back in the day? John Rolfe, and he goes,
still today.
Get that paper. There's something about like I am experimenting with all these possible ways where I can bring in resources, maybe ways I hadn't considered before. There could be, I think, with Gemini sometimes maybe the abundant with Jupiter and Gemini, the abundance of ideas that you would want to ground into solid reality. But I think it's interesting too with the ruler Mercury now being retrograde in the fifth house, just passing a conjunction to Venus. This may ask you also to reconsider, are you being precise enough with the creativity that you want to put into the world? Are you really doing the sort of organizational process behind that creativity that will bring those greater resources? Or, which can happen with Virgo very easily, are you going, like you said, Dana, too far? Are you getting mired in details about like, am I finding the exact right thing that brings my heart the exact right amount of joy and that organizes that joy in just the right way? And realizing like, well, I can also just, put forward some experimental ideas here and see what happens. And I think it's interesting that, you've got Saturn sitting right up there in the 11th house, which may ask for some amount of shift or change within, especially in Pisces, the sort of energetic or emotional dynamics of your social networks of people that you're around, within. I usually think of the 11th house in more of like a work or professional setting, but the people who sort of support you and support your ideals in the world, there might be some maybe challenge from that, or the ask to go through some sort of more challenging emotional understanding within that sphere of life that would free you to move forward on that rocket ship of Jupiter and Mars. And that will I think the gravity is going to really feel like it's pulling on Jupiter and Mars, but that Saturn in the 11th house, there's something there of asking for some kind of grieving or ending or allowing to melt away of something that will allow you to do that, which may, I've had my own experiences with Saturn and Pisces recently. It can be challenging, but ultimately freeing and cathartic.
Nice. Dana, you want to add anything?
I loved what you said about the experimentation factor of Jupiter, which you said earlier, but it makes a lot of sense here. And thinking about the square with Saturn, I feel like you said this in so many words, but just that experimentation might actually be the thing that's causing the friction within the groups. And that is like a growth point maybe for Taurus risings.
Yeah. I feel like the Mars Jupiter conjunction is like really wanting to build or develop something and grow something, and probably is excited for some kind of shift of philosophy or different skills or technologies being utilized for the sake of like income or money or business, because there's this like, want to do something, and the doing is governed by a Mercury that's retrograde. So it's like, let's do something new, let's revise and have this new way of approaching things around money or business or blah blah blah, and it's really excited. And then there's this check from Saturn in the 11th being like, you owe me something, or you're obligated to me, or there's some duty or some sense of like burden, and it's gonna be like, well, how much am I beholden to that Saturn and the collective obligation it represents, or some higher religious or spiritual or collective concern? And it might be that you can't please all the people all the time. You know, it might be that you can't be everyone's cup of tea. But you also don't have to necessarily discard all social obligation or responsibility either. So maybe there's some middle path that can be walked.
Love that.
I also wouldn't be surprised if there are friends or colleagues who just don't like what you're doing, who are like, I don't like this new thing you're doing, and you just have to go, that's none of my business, you know, like that could happen, because I've noticed from being a Taurus rising, Saturn in the 11th at times has been like friends, colleagues, people in groups that I belong to being sort of like a buzzkill, and me just having to go, oh, that's too bad. And look at me trying to think I can please everyone. I don't care, you know, or something like that. That's really hard for me personally. As a Taurus rising too, like, you want to please people, you want to be Venusian and so forth. So Venus is debilitated this month in the house of creativity for Taurians. That might mean that your creative impulse is not going to satisfy everyone, or that it's there's some kind of creative remaking, and that you know, certain people or relationships will be strained by virtue of it. But that may be how it has to happen. All right, let's go forward to Gemini. And we put all the mutable signs, when we get to our mutable horoscopes, we're putting these transits on the angles, which makes probably our mutable signs out there for your mutable rising signs are probably some of the most potent this month. So for Geminis, what I see is, you know, the first house tends to be center stage, like spotlight right on that house when there's a lot of action. So I would probably sort of centralize the importance of Mars Jupiter this month in the middle of the month for Geminis. You know, that is a great placement for assertive, aggressive, competitive, driven, motivated actions. Like, go get it. That's the, you know, that's your mantra this month. Just go get it. I think, like we were saying, Jupiter Saturn square, Saturn in the 10th house, there's going to be a feeling of prohibition or restriction. Well, you can go get it up to 50%, or, you know, like, well, you can go get it, but you also still have to work a day job until your business is ready to go. Or like, I feel like Saturn is going to want to clip the wings or hold Mars Jupiter back. Now, on the other hand, Mars and Jupiter together can be like riding on a high horse, maybe a little arrogance or inflation of the ego, and Saturn might be providing some kind of check. Hey, you need to be emotionally sensitive and look at your duties, your obligations, your responsibilities, realize you're a part of a vast universe, and don't get too high on yourself. And so Saturn might provide some wisdom, some maturity for Mars Jupiter if Mars Jupiter is getting too high on itself. I would also think that what makes this really interesting is the personal transformation that wants to happen for Geminis this month is also being guided by a Mercury retrograde and Venus in the 4th house of home, property and living environment, family karma. So the way in which you're wanting to change is probably related also to things happening around home and family that are really important. So the balance between the house of your work, your job, your public occupation or reputation, personal changes you're trying to make, and a kind of revisionary process that's working through the roots of your life at the level of home and family makes it a pretty dynamic month. So I'll leave it there. What do you guys think?
You know, I just think like Jupiter and Mars sitting right in the 1st house could feel really fun. It could also feel, for a Gemini rising, really maddening, because it's like, it's so much more information than even Geminis are used to taking in and processing. So I feel like the idea of, I actually think in a way, Venus, the ruler being in Virgo, so Mercury being in Virgo, retrograde, and Saturn provides somewhat of a mute to that, where it feels like a month where it could feel like, oh my God, there's all these ideas and all these ways, and I could change in this way. I could just, I'm going to go this way. It could feel like both of those, the retrograde and Saturn, are just like, and you can be grounded and you can be stable and you can implement these things one at a time. And just because you have the idea doesn't mean you have to do it. Or if, you know, notice if you have an idea, again, are you implementing it? Because I think this Jupiter-Mars could feel like, wow, I have a great idea about how I want to change my body, mind, psychology, a lot of things that go on with the first house. But there's a nice organizational quality from Virgo there, and Saturn just being a little bit like the adult in the room, just being like, hang on a second, like, to do that, where it's going to require some harder things that you may not have considered, and just to take those into consideration as you move forward.
Yeah.
I've been thinking since we started, it seems like for all of us, like no matter who you are, this month is a little destabilizing. We're going to need to get a little uncomfortable with uncertainty and being a little unclear on what's working, what's not. And I think for Gemini risings, that's a little more pronounced because you do have this really strong first house energy where you're ready to go, you're ready to do stuff. But the mercurial function it's retrograde right now. And so I'm curious to see, how for Gemini risings out there, maybe how you navigate that. Like you think you know what you want, but then there's going to be some curveballs, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's as though, it is as though the impetus to move forward is like someone's pressing the pause button and saying, but before you can move forward, you have to organize your closet, like you have to like purge your dresser of clothing and take it to Goodwill. And, like there's some kind of process of delays, setbacks, revisions. On the other hand, like I could see this being the implementation of a new strategy. And because Mercury's retrograde with Mars and Jupiter, I would say like, it's like I've attacked this problem in so many different ways. And now I'm realizing I want to implement a new strategy. And if there's a little bit of patience and tact involved, then the Saturn check could also represent a maturation of a philosophy that hasn't worked in the past that now will, because it's matured somehow. Yeah. All right, let's move on to Cancer rising, and we'll hand it back to Dana.
All right. So Cancer risings, Mercury retrograde is moving through your third and second houses. So it's initiating a review in third house things, daily rituals, routines, siblings, communication. And that's going to be somehow tied to the second house because Mercury will eventually move back into Leo. So your assets, your resources, and your livelihood. And of course, this is happening while Venus moves through Virgo in your third house. I was thinking about Venus and Virgo, and it's funny you mentioned the closet, Adam, because I was thinking about Mommy Dearest a little bit, which clearly Venus and Virgo is not inherently mean or abusive, right? But it's that exacting precision, like no more wire hangers. We don't do that here. It's about being precise with the details. And that can make connection challenging, which is why Venus has a harder time in Virgo. But because of this connection with the second and third houses, to me, I thought about, you're trying to organize your daily life so that maybe your resources can be more easily managed. Like maybe you're writing marketing emails and you're being really meticulous with your words so that you can bring in more resources, right? So there's something going on there that's pretty important. Again, with Venus and Virgo, we want to be careful of being self-sacrificing and being in the house that can indicate siblings. I would just encourage Cancer risings to go into the month remembering that giving everything you have is not helping. That's not helping anybody. It's not helping you. It's not helping them. Helping is being aware of your boundaries. And so that's something I would just encourage us to think about as we move into this month. You may be giving too much, and Mercury retrograde might be helping you realize that, especially because the resources are tied into this as well. So then we've got in the ninth house, and the third and the ninth house, Saturn is in your ninth house, and we know that's the house of philosophies and spirituality and higher learning. So I'm thinking about, for Cancer risings, what you've gotten serious about when it comes to your beliefs. Maybe it's a spiritual practice. Maybe it's your values. Maybe you're just kind of making those a little more concrete since March of last year. And this Venus opposition is sort of showing you where your daily life doesn't align with that. And I'm still thinking about maybe this giving too much. oh, actually, I do need more boundaries. And that's a part of my values, but I haven't really been implementing that in my daily life. And now I'm seeing where that's causing a problem for me. And then, of course, we've got this conjunction in the 12th house with Mars and Jupiter. We know that Jupiter in Gemini is the critic, or it can be critical. We know that Mars can kind of cut things out. So with the two of them making a conjunction in the 12th, and the fact that they're squaring Venus, they're squaring Saturn around the same time of the conjunction, I wonder what this is going to bring up in terms of a blind spot. If this opposition between Venus and Saturn can show you where you're maybe not moving through your daily life in alignment with your values, that might bring up something in your subconscious where you're like, oh, this is why, right? And I'm ready to not do that anymore. So I think that for Cancer risings, there's a lot of potential for freedom from the more subconscious ways we hold ourselves back, and how our behavior kind of gets in the way or doesn't align, is a better way to say that, with what we believe to be true and right.
I love that.
Dana, you're going to regret bringing up Mommy Dearest, because now I have all the lines. And I was just thinking with Venus and Virgo, I have to say it, when she lifts up the plant, she goes, I'm not mad at you, Helga. I'm mad at the dirt. It's such a perfect Venus and Virgo type of line, you know. But I think one of the things you were bringing up that I really love that you're emphasizing in the read of Venus and Virgo is the giving nature, the serving nature of Virgo, the desire to be generous, to give from the wheat sheath. And I think, like, I'm wondering, with Mercury moving back into the second house and then conjunct the Sun, squaring Uranus in the 11th house, there's just a feeling like it's been just kind of second nature to give and give and give and make sure everything's organized and it's organized for everybody else. And there's a feeling, especially as Mercury makes the conjunction with the Sun in mid-August, that they're like, but is that fair to me? Am I benefiting from this as well as others? Are people in the group, there's a shakeup in a group that I'm in where Uranus in your 11th house that really alters this feeling of like, but me too. It's okay for me to feel that I can benefit from the fruits of the work that I put into the world. Yeah.
Love that. I guess the only thing that I would add here for Cancers is that whenever I've said this before on horoscopes, but whenever I look at Gemini in the 12th with Cancer in the first, I always think, it's the emotional intelligence for Cancerians is often the gift. The rational, detached, kind of curious, flexible, open-minded, like the rational stuff is not always as easy. And I really wonder about, like, questions that require a kind of objectivity, and how difficult that might be for Cancerians this month, with like Venus in her fall in a very rational place with Mercury, Venus opposing Saturn in the 9th, where you could almost say, like, well, what's true, or whose truth is most important? And Mars and Jupiter in the 12th are almost like saying, you must use strong, clear, rational thinking, and you don't always know how to do that if it's in the 12th house, or it's a tough spot for you, or you lack it somehow, or there's a way in which you're justifying something through the appearance of rationality. And it's, we all do that, right? We use, look at this great argument I just came up with, but it's actually you're just justifying something that's more emotional and impulsive. So I could see some of those tensions around emotional and intellectual intelligence sort of playing out in key spots during the month. Right. That was great. I love that. I think hopefully Cancers, you take some good stuff from that. Let's move on to Leo. We'll hand it over to Alex for our 2nd, 11th, and 8th houses that are highlighted here.
I think all that Leo risings really need to know is that all the astrology this month just says that you're magnificent and special and incredible. And there's never been anyone like you in the face of the planet, and there never will be again. I'm done. Yep. That's all we need. I think this is actually a very helpful month for Leos, though it may not be a lot of fun. I see Venus and Mercury going into the 2nd house here and their whole interaction as again, it's similar to what you were saying, Dana, about, the giving, and, like checking out, am I over giving? Am I over extending myself in some way, especially with resources or worth or value, and that needs to be reevaluated, or especially with Virgo, reorganized. You could see something here where, well, Venus is opposing Saturn. It's like, I really just need to organize my finances in a business spreadsheet. It's not fun, but it's organized and it's helpful, and it helps you feel more secure, more stable. It's not always the natural impulse of fire signs to go for like those sort of practical, earthy, organized ways to go, but they can really help support them. And I think that this dynamic with Saturn in the superior square from the 8th house in Pisces to Jupiter and Mars conjunction in the 11th house is really interesting to me. I think the impulse will be to sort of experiment with the people you're interacting with, or the people who can really help prop up your career, the legacy, or the way you're seen in the world, all the 10th house things that the 11th house props up. And I think Saturn in the 8th house may ask for, are you willing to let go of older ways of emotionally perceiving those connections that need to sort of decay or leave or move on? Or, something, Adam, you've been saying a lot about Saturn and Pisces evolved here that I really like is, where are you feeling overly burdened or guilted or obligated by some interaction coming from the 8th house, where it's like, I really want to move off in a new experimental direction. I want to work with this kind of person. But there's some sense of feeling, but I've always worked with this, or I've always done it this way, or this person in my life might be mad at me, or I feel guilty about moving on from that, those obligation feelings of the 8th house. And just maybe finding the balance there of just realizing some things you just got to grieve and feel some sadness around, and allow to move on themselves in order for you to sort of rocket ship on in new connections. So that's my thought for Leos.
Yeah. I would say that the piece that stands out to me right away is, what are the burdens and obligations that you have to other people this month that are shifting or changing? It's like Jupiter Mars suggests the potential for collaboration and connection with allies or groups of people, but it's being overcome from the superior square to Saturn in the 8th, which in the 8th house probably has to do with obligations that you have to other people, like karmic debts, or it's like it's not so easy to escape what you owe to Saturn in the 8th house. Mm-hmm. And Saturn in the 8th house is also opposing the Venus that's moving through the 2nd. So I just wouldn't be surprised if for Leos there are exciting new opportunities and things that you're really thinking about for yourself, and maybe new allies, friends, or groups, but it's almost like you got to pay off a credit card before you can join the new club.
Yeah. This is going to be weird maybe, but I thought about Beatles songs twice as you guys were talking.
Ooh.
Okay. So 2nd house, Can't Buy Me Love. Like we can't use money to fill ourselves up and make ourselves happy. That maybe there's a separation with those two things. And then the 11th house, I get by with a little help from my friends. Like there's some drudgery maybe here. And, but the 11th house offers a little bit of like rah, like we'll help you. So that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Love that. All right. Yeah. That was a solid one for Leo there. Move on to Virgo. I'll take this one. We've got the mutable signs in the angles again, and mostly here 1, 10, and 7. So, what comes to my mind for Virgos is there's, I think that there is a way in which you're going to have to look at yourself this month, whether that's your self-image, your behavior, your psychology. It's sort of a look in the mirror kind of month. It could be very easy to, with Venus debilitated in that house, to not love what you see. And I wonder how that is coming, like how that relates to your relationships right now. For example, when you're in a relationship with someone who is, let's just say, very critical, you're going to probably over time adopt a negative idea about yourself. if you're with someone who is constantly admiring you and affirming you and encouraging you, you'll adopt probably, it'll be easier to overcome various self-doubts or insecurities, right? So I see this as a month where it's like, who are you, Virgo? And how do you feel about yourself? And how is that feeling being shaped by your relationships or your job? What you're trying to be or who you're trying to appeal to publicly, what you're trying to accomplish, and how are those things tied into your self-esteem, your self-image? Sometimes we think accomplishment can help us overcome bad feelings about ourselves. And it almost never does, right? It's like you'll accomplish something and you'll still feel not so great about who you are, because who you are is beautiful without qualification, and no degree of merit or accomplishment will grant you the specialness of being that is your birthright, right? So I feel like Virgos might be going through something quite existential this month, and it's really important for this month. One angle I'm taking on this anyhow is that this month is about not needing to be anything other than you are to be beautiful and special. I think there could be some need to revise or shift something about yourself, your physical health, your diet, your appearance, but have fun with it. Do it because you can, not because your worth is on the line. And I would also imagine that this is a time where self-value and a process of growth personally is intersecting with work and relationships at a pretty deep level.
I think what you said, that was just so affirming and beautiful. And I think everybody should listen to the Virgo horoscopes. Like, everybody needed to hear that.
Right.
That was really, really good. But I was thinking that Mercury retrograding into the 12th sort of reinforces what you said about, like, you might be dealing with some deeper things this month. But I think if you can, like Adam said, sort of approach these realizations, first of all, allow them to be there and accept them, and then approach them with that openness and that lovingness. This could be a really profound month for Virgo risings and very healing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think, I'm looking at, again, Mercury retrograding from the 1st to the 12th house. And along the lines of what you guys have been saying, there's a feeling with Virgo sometimes like it's okay to feel special. It's okay. You can look at the place where it's just like you have denied. Sometimes it's really painful to look at the places you've denied yourself things because you didn't think you were good enough or perfect enough, which can be something that happens with Virgos, and realizing it's okay to shine. It's okay. Take it from the Leo risings. Like, we don't mind, right? It's like, so it's like, there's a feeling here where it's like, it's okay to feel special. And I think sometimes also when Saturn is checking things, especially with Virgo and the Virgo Pisces axis, it's also can be a month where if you're looking introspectively of looking at, why am I sacrificing? What am I trying to achieve? What am I trying to get from the sacrifices? There's some amount of control that's actually involved with that as well. Which you can look at compassionately. It would make sense. It would be a very, very understandable coping mechanisms for someone with strong Virgo in their chart to think, if I just give and give and give, it will get me this and this and this. And to really take a look at that, you don't have to do it that way. It might be compassionately looking at what's going on and then saying, I don't need to do that. I can make an adjustment to just embody myself as I am.
Yeah, I was thinking about the 12th house talk that I did in June, where we looked at the juxtaposition between the archetypes of the ascending sign and the 12th house sign. And for Virgos, one of the things we said was that there is no amount of good deeds, of getting things right, of skill development, of being useful, all the gifts of Virgo, really. But there's no amount of that can ever grant you just an innate sense of being a child of the universe. Like, you are just special and wonderful, and that is sometimes the most inaccessible and almost like a blind spot for Virgos. And so this Mercury retrograde starting off in your house and then dipping into Leo, to me, is really special, because my daughter's a Virgo rising, and I see this in her. And it's interesting because obviously you could extrapolate some interesting things about the father by looking at the sun in the chart. Anyhow, but one of the things that I think we need to do for our Virgos, like if you have a friend that's a Virgo rising or has a lot of Virgo energy, just be that person that just heaps praise on them for just being like, I just love who you are. Because my daughter, when I tell her that, will go, well, what do you love about me? And I'll go, all of it, like all of it. And even stuff I can't even describe. And like to see my little girl, like she just glows, and like that we all have a 12th house spot that's like that, where it's like it's a spot we can't itch, and we need our friends, our parents, mentors. We need other people in our life to help us like scratch that itch. So I feel like that's sort of what we all said in different ways on this one, I think. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's move to so one of the things that I'm doing, by the way, which is interesting, I was looking at this astrology and thinking of my daughter, who's been weirdly going through some issues with confidence, with Mercury moving through Leo in her 12th house recently. And so whenever I notice stuff like that, I will be like, let's have a daddy-daughter day, because we do I don't know if you guys have ever had parents that did this or whatever, but like my wife and I will take each of the kids separately and just go and do something with them. Like we'll go to the zoo, or we'll go see a movie or whatever. So I was like, let's have a daddy-daughter day. Like, let's just and so I planned one for during the Mercury retrograde, when it's in her first house, dipping back into the 12th. Cause I was like, if there's any way we can use this stuff as parents or friends or whatever, that's how we should be using it,
100% proactive.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, I just wanted to share that in case there's also people out there who need to take your Virgo friend out to lunch. Yep. All right, we'll put Libra on the ascendant and hand it off to Dana.
Okay, Libra risings, your token Libra rising on the panel is here for you. Let's start with Mercury retrograde moving through your 12th and 11th houses. So we're getting a review of what's going on behind the scenes, the subconscious, the blind spots. And this is somehow tied to either and the groups you align yourself with, or what you're striving to achieve. So we know this is happening while Venus is moving through your 12th house. And we know that Venus in Virgo is, again, about its precision, its exactness, its dedication to the ideal at any expense, which may not always be good for us. So this feels like a moment where maybe you're pulling weeds from your subconscious. Like you're able to sort of root out things that are no longer beautiful there, and maybe having some awareness around what those things are. I also think for Libra risings, just as Libra rising, we always need reminders that giving too much of ourselves, again, is not helping anyone. I know I said that in another horoscope, but I think it's true here too. We want to help and be of service naturally. We're unifiers. We're like the social glue, or at least that's how I think of, Venus ruled people. But for many of us, sort of like what you were saying about the 12th house, in your 12th house talks, Adam, with Virgo being in the 12th, there is something about Libra risings that feels like we always need to be doing more to sort of prove that, like, hey, I'm lovable. Hey, I'm worthy. And so I think that might be coming up for us with Venus and Virgo for this month for Libra risings. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone. It needs to come from within you. And we might get some opportunities to learn that this month. So Saturn has been in the 6th house since March of last year, creating the context for maybe getting serious about your health and your work. I would imagine Libra risings, you've been busy. You've been working pretty hard. And as Venus opposes Saturn, it feels like there's something about your work that might be activating in the psychological sense. Like it might be bringing something up for you. And so it's like you're trying your best, but there's a part of you that feels like maybe it's never enough. And so you might want to just have some awareness around that, around the time of this opposition. But I will say this is kind of exactly, in my mind anyway, what we want to happen. Like we need these moments of crisis and conflict, not that it's going to be super dramatic, right? But we need these moments to happen so that we can realize what's not working and maybe what's kind of going on behind the scenes that's driving us and we're not even aware of. So I think this could be really helpful, if not provoking. Now, we've got this Mars-Jupiter conjunction in the 9th. And so it's bringing up what you really believe in, what is really important to you. I'm thinking about the 9th house being the house of philosophies and values and perhaps spirituality. So this might feel very serious in a sense, like taking your values very seriously. And maybe what's going on with the 6th house, with your work, your health, is creating some kind of conflict with that you've got to work through. And of course, Venus is in the mix too. So there's a lot happening here that really could feel very provoking, very busy, very like, I don't think existential is the right word here, but it's getting at like your deepest convictions and kind of testing them. And so I could keep going, but I think I'll stop there.
Alex, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just quickly, I love that, Dana. I and that line of convictions, right, or knowing your convictions. I feel like that Jupiter Mars in the 9th house. I think one of the things that Libras sometimes catch a lot of shit for, and I think it's sometimes unfair, is the ability to see both sides. They really can see both sides of something. And yes, that can manifest as indecision or trying to hop on the bandwagon of the most popular side. That can happen. But I feel like that Jupiter-Mars conjunction in the 9th house just intuitively is like permission to, not Gemini being the 9th house, really see there is this and there is this. It's okay for me to see that there really are two sides to something. And Saturn, I see Saturn in the 6th house squaring that Jupiter Mars. For Libra rising to commit to that way of seeing, their own way of seeing might feel really challenging. It might feel like hard work. It might feel like you do have to sacrifice something in order to say, like, I get that we all want to come down on one decision or another decision, but sometimes there really are two sides. There really is Castor and Pollux, the two stars of Gemini, so it's maybe coming to peace with that in some way, of not feeling like there's something that needs to be changed about that, unless it was becoming something that was maladaptive or not helpful for your life.
These are such nice takes from both of you. I love them. I think like the thing, if I'm just like, I'm kind of isolating the Jupiter Saturn square because it's going to be repeating in December. So I've been just looking at that while you guys are talking. And one of the things that comes to my mind is, okay, so like every sign has its inherent strengths and weaknesses. So for me, the strength of Libra is it has an, like you said, like an eye for both sides of things. I think that comes from an ability to see on the level of the sort of archetypal, architectural, and Venusian all simultaneously. It's the exaltation of Saturn and the rulership of Venus. In a masculine air sign, that's like someone who can really, like, it's like a judge who sits down and hears the story of a criminal, but has the insight to understand how that criminal probably became that criminal. And so there's a sense of like mercy and compassion and a pretty well-rounded understanding of human behavior in a judge like that. And like, that doesn't mean that the criminal won't get punished, but it means that the punishment will sort of fit a really deep and full understanding of the situation. And to me, like, that's Libra's gift. Like, in any situation, just wise, keen, well-rounded discernment and judgment. What I find, as someone who has a couple planets in Libra, myself 3 planets in Libra myself, I find that what is really difficult is the Earth. Like, this world is not ever going to live up to the perfect triangles and circles in the mind of God that Libra can see so easily. And so, like, like Librans like very clean, often like clean environments and clean lines. And even I've noticed sometimes like black and white photography, I think that sometimes it is hard when, like Jupiter, Mars, I see a strong emerging set of ideals, beliefs, convictions. Saturn in Pisces in the 6th house to me is messy and emotional and sacrificial. And it says, look, if you want to implement these things in the world, it's going to require some sacrifices that are like yucky, that they don't feel good, and that require you to like go from hanging out with the gods and looking at the scrolls of the archetypes in Olympus somewhere and come down and like be stuck into the boiling cauldron of life. And you have to make some sacrifice for these higher beliefs to be like enacted in your life. And I just feel like that's really hard for air signs in general. And yet, for some kind of creative fulfillment to take place in the life of Librans, like, this has to happen. Jupiter's at that 0 degree in the 5th house of creativity, right? And so the creativity and the 9th house stuff, for example, I would say just knowing that Dana's Libra, you said you're Libra rising, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I would be like, oh, for someone like yourself, this is about your astrology career taking off and really starting to grow and flourish. And like, there's that creative content building and developing. And yet there's something really difficult about, like, you also have a job. You have like a real 9-to-5 job. There are like, how do you make compromises and meaningful sacrifices around something that's blowing up over here? But you also have to like be in the messy world where like it's not a lot of people think it's okay to be an astrologer, and it's also like hard to do it full time and blah blah blah. Like that's kind of the level of compromise that I see working out right now. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And fun fact, the full moon that looks just absolutely nuts is the first day of school. So
there you go. There you go. Yeah, totally. So anyway, I just wanted to articulate that because I got really deep into the weeds looking at that Jupiter-Saturn square. So I was like,
love it.
All right, Alex, you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, Scorpio, we've got the 5th, 11th, and 8th houses highlighted this month for you Scorpios.
Okay, so for Scorpios, this Jupiter Mars dynamic in the 8th house is really interesting to me because it may feel like squared by Saturn from the 5th. Scorpios, I think, function at their best creatively when they're allowed to stew, when they're allowed to really kind of cook in their own, introspective space and let it, and I have a friend who's very strongly Scorpio, and I can see like he has to go to the extreme of everything to understand it and to create something. It can't just be created. It has to really cook for a while. And I'm wondering with Saturn, in the 5th house, which has to do with creativity and personal pleasure and the things we kind of find enjoyable, if there's some amount of needing to really stew on a creative project a little bit so that it feels like you're able to, I guess the word would be, I hate the word manifest. I just feel like it's like cliched so much, but like that's the word that's coming to mind. Like that you're able to like pull out something that feels very creative, very real, very raw and emotional. And I think it's so interesting squaring Jupiter and Mars in the 8th house, because that to me says something about like something has to be in Gemini. You have to choose one or the other. You've got to choose this twin or you've got to choose that twin. There's some amount of I felt obligated to one thing or two things at the same time. And I felt like I'm pulled towards two things at the same time. And I have to just actually make a choice about the severing of a tie that will allow me to move forward in this more creative space. And then opposing Venus Saturn opposing Venus in the 11th house in Virgo. This does feel to me like it has to do with Mercury retrograding back into the 10th house, something to do with your career, something to do with the way you're known, seen, visible in the world. And that Venus saying something about like, really being precise about the people who are around you. I think Scorpios are actually very good at this. They're able to see down to like the base level of like, well, who's a friend here and who's maybe a frenemy. There's something about being very precise and organized about who are the people who are genuinely supporting you in that. But I see some choices having to be made with that Gemini, that conjunction in Gemini in the 8th house around it.
Right.
Yeah, I was thinking about the 11th and 8th together. I just kept thinking about like cutting ties with friends and having the courage to do that. And maybe it's about principles or principles or what we think is right. But having the courage to do that, I think it's here for Scorpio risings this month. So that's what I noticed.
I think I'm starting to really focus on the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic in every chart we're looking at. And I'm thinking about the fact that Jupiter-Mars in the 8th house, it appears as one of two things in my mind. One, an incredible resource that is appearing through someone else, right? Like someone else has a resource, whether that's an intellectual resource or financial resource. And it's like, appearing and presenting itself, and it's really exciting. But that resource is like immediately being called into question. How will it affect your social life, your relationships, your colleagues, your friends, the groups you belong to? It could change them somehow. Maybe those changes are good and exciting, but then we also have to contend with Saturn. So that when I think about the Jupiter-Saturn square, I also think Saturn in the 5th says, well, that's a great resource, but it's not quite in line with my creative needs or values or happiness. But it could give me this or that advantage, and so maybe I should compromise, or maybe I shouldn't compromise, and I'm going to be passing up on some kind of resource. Like I could see it as a clash or conversation about values and manifesting resources, and what should be taken advantage of or what should be set aside and passed over.
Love that.
Yeah. Let's go to Sagittarius. So with Sag, we have the Sag risings are going to get houses 10, 7, and 4 lit up by this sequence of planets moving through the double-bodied or mutable signs. One of the things that I can't help but think about right away is like, well, there's a Mercury retrograde in your career house. So are there some practical shifts or changes or revisions or setbacks or delays, or what's happening there, and how is it related to relationships in the workplace with Venus debilitated in that house? Like, are you having to make some compromises, or is the social atmosphere driving you to make changes in your career because it's not up to your standard? Or so I wonder about the connection between workplace relationships and workplace changes. You know what? I'm going to say this is kind of like super, I feel like this is like a gossip column astrology. You could fall in love with someone in the workplace this month. You know? It's like Mars, Jupiter are in the 7th house, and they're like ruled by a Mercury retrograde in the 10th and a Venus that's up there. I just feel like drama. I've fallen in love with my boss or my coworker or something like that, which I think could pop up, honestly. But the other thing that I will say about this is that I wonder about, like, when you see Saturn in the 4th like this, I also wonder, like, sometimes changes in relationships and on the home front, like if you're married or in a relationship and you live with someone, I could see changes happening for a spouse or partner or in the home setup, demanding that something shift in the workplace, like the work and home life balance. How is that shifting or changing this month? Is a spouse going to work? Is after not having a job? Is a spouse getting a raise, but that's going to limit how much time they have for the family? So I wonder about the work life and home life balance and how that questions about those things are intersecting with important relationships.
That's the track I was going down, Adam. I was thinking the same type of thing, where it's just like, you know, I think Venus and Mercury in Virgo, one of the great skills of Virgo is, a couple of great skills are organization, discernment, and the ability to sort of hone in on things, assess what's real, assess like, okay, through analyzation, let's kind of get down to the, you know, what this really is. And I could see Saturn opposing Venus, Saturn, you know, and all the squares happening now to Jupiter and Mars in the 7th house and the relationship house being something like that. Like, you know, I really have to reassess the organization of my work or my work day. I have to see, you know, is it actually providing me with some, you know, can I go home and shut my computer, you know, or is someone complaining at home that I can't go home and shut my computer? Or, you know, they could see that from the relationship house. They're saying like, hey, you know, when you come home, you're on your laptop until 1 a.m. and then you just get up and go to work. There could be those kinds of discussions that come up. And, you know, though Venus is in her fall traditionally in Virgo, one of the things I think Venus in Virgo does really well is see where harmony can be brought about by a reorganization of something, or making something a little bit, you know, just a tiny bit here, a tiny bit here, a little shift here. And wow, that freed up a lot more time or a lot more enjoyment of the space that I'm in.
Yeah, nice.
I was reading planets in transit in preparation for this about Saturn through the houses, right? And so Robert Hand was talking about how Saturn can often, it will show up, you know, externally which all of planets can, right? But it will show up as something externally so that you can deal with something internally. But I feel like that is extra true for Sag risings because of Saturn being in the 4th house. Yes, it's about home and family, but it's also about your deep inner world too. So if it feels like home is imposing and it's forcing you to do like you've got too much responsibility, there's something more going on than just like the burdens. The burdens are trying to teach you something.
Oh, Dana, I love that. Yeah, that was really
Beautiful
good. Especially also, like, I would add to that, because Saturn and Jupiter are squared, that what if your partner or spouse or interpersonal relationships are becoming demanding, or if the home or family is presenting as a big burden or duty, or both somehow, that dilemma is, as you just said, that's something that's there for you, not just a problem to be like solved.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm so thankful you brought that up. Yeah, that was great. Let's shift to Capricorn, since we're getting close to an hour and a half here now. So we'll hand this one over to Dana.
Okay, Cap risings. Mercury retrograde is going to move through your 9th and 8th houses. So this is a review of both your philosophies and your beliefs. Well, starting with your philosophies and your beliefs, but it's tied somehow to 8th house things, your joint ventures, what you owe others, transformations. I think this Mercury retrograde is really interesting for Cap risings. It's an opportunity to maybe parse out the beliefs that you've inherited. Venus moving through your 9th house is going to help you be a little more critical of those beliefs that have been there and are there, and maybe thinking, is this really what I want to subscribe to? Is this really like, are these really my operating principles that I want to use to make choices about my life? Even though Venus is in fall, I think that this particular Venus situation is really helpful for being discerning about what you believe and who you adhere to, who or what you adhere to. I think what might be challenging about this, without thinking about like the other transits that are going on, is that the host of Venus in Virgo is retrograde in your 8th house. And that has to do with what you do with others. I was thinking about my dad. He has Venus in Virgo, and one of his catchphrases that has stuck with me forever is, if you want to do anything right, you have to do it yourself. And I think that can be a really harmful belief. But that's the kind of thing we're untangling maybe for these Cap risings is, do I really have to do everything myself? And I think that's, even if we weren't talking about Venus and Virgo, that's a lesson for Cap risings. Like, you don't have to do it all yourself, but that might be coming up for us. So meanwhile, we've got Saturn transiting your 3rd house since March of 2023, giving you a lot of responsibility in terms of your daily life, your siblings, perhaps. Interesting story, and I'll try not to talk too much about this, but my mom is a Cap rising, and last year my grandma passed away while Venus was retrograde in Leo in her 8th house. And since then, my mom became the executor of the will. There was no will. So my mom just she became in charge because she was the one who lived closest. So this last year has really been Saturn in the 3rd to the extreme. Like, she's been the one going to the lawyer, cleaning out the house. And of course, that's super specific, but I think we can extrapolate the general idea of that to helping you realize how Saturn in the 3rd has been playing out for you. So Venus opposing Saturn might present a situation in which you reach a breaking point with that. Like, you may not be able to carry those responsibilities anymore. And you might realize that you need to kind of reorient your worldview. And there's the 9th house. Like, how do I want to move through life? And again, how can I orient my daily life to kind of match that? And how can I delegate? Like, how can I not be responsible for everything and everyone? It's not working for me anymore. We've got the Mars-Jupiter conjunction happening in the 6th. So this is bringing your daily work and health into the mix. Thinking about Jupiter being critical and sort of deciding what it wants through this process of elimination. The fact that it's squaring the 9th and the 3rd. It's a lot of work for Cap risings. I think Cap risings are used to working and they maybe don't mind it as much, but I just see this moment as being potentially anyway, being pushed to the limit, to the point where you're like, I have to rethink this. I cannot do it like this. I need someone else to help me, and I'm going to ask for it now. And I think that's the best way we could use this energy for Cap risings.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that Jupiter-Mars conjunction in the sixth house is interesting for Capricorns, because I feel like, if the tough stuff comes up from the sixth house, whatever it is, whatever the slog feels like, the instinct for a Capricorn often is to throw their bag over the shoulder and do it, like you said, Dana, do it themselves, right? I will assume the heavy responsibility of moving the goat up the mountain, so to speak. But with Gemini being the sixth house and Mars being involved, it might be like this might involve actually like noticing if you're taking your role or it too seriously, unless it is something that needs to be taken seriously, of course, or if it requires some amount of experimentation that requires the assumption of another point of view that you may not have considered before. But in order to move through the challenge, there's a sense where I have to put down my sense of I must achieve the sense of responsibility. And like, maybe it just requires a little bit of magic and manifestation and letting go into the ether of my own mind and its experimental possibilities, or seeking out something that could help with that. So that's just where I go with the Jupiter Mars in the sixth house.
Nice. Yeah, again, I've been looking at the Jupiter-Saturn dynamic in particular, and just thinking about the fact that for Caps, it's so closely related to where the conjunction took place in the second house, the original Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, where Pluto is right now. And I'm just wondering, what is or isn't worth continuing to work for? If Pluto is bringing about some transformation of assets and values and resources, then maybe there's a calling into question of beliefs and ideas. There's a lot of thought going on, but I think it relates back to what sacrifices and hard work and labor is and is not worth it. I feel like Caps are being asked to compromise, and compromise with respect to what you want to continue trying to build, that you've been trying to build for a while. Compromise is important for Capricorns. I think it's along the lines of what both of you were saying in different ways, which is that sometimes Capricorns are sort of relentless in what they pursue, and they're not satisfied with like, well, just, maybe like 50% of what you're trying to get to, like, but I feel like here there's some question of like, you can't do it all. You have to like make some choices. So yeah. All right, let's push it to Aquarius. Thank you, Dana, for that one. That was great. And Aquarius, we have the Pisces, Virgo, Gemini houses in 2, 8, and 5 being lit up here.
This is really interesting, and I think presents a fun conundrum for Aquariuses, which is if I lead off of this Jupiter-Saturn dynamic, which is a build off of Pluto moving into your first house on the 0 degree of Aquarius. There's something to me here of letting yourself become experimental and maybe feeling almost like overwhelmed by possibility of what could be creative and satisfying for you, which for Aquarius is often is something mental. It's like I'm sorting out some sort of system in my head that I'm going to try to grasp and grok on a sort of cerebral level. But there's Saturn in the second house here would be asking, I think, for not forgetting that there's an emotional, energetic, use the word spiritual sense of needing to hold your own value emotionally too. Like, is your experimentation and creativity and moving into these wonderful ways of the fifth house and Jupiter and Mars sparked by a shift in identity that's coming in from Pluto in the first house? Is it also asking you to remember that, like, your worth and your value and how you manifest that, maybe physically with money, is also an important consideration here. And that it could feel like, again, you can get lost in the world of ideas with this. But I think Pluto's imperative in the first house may be an ask to shift in one's identity around, like, it's also okay for me to feel like I have a sense of spiritual value. Like, I think Pisces and Aquarius are really interesting houses to be going together here with Pluto and Saturn, in the sense of like, Aquarians really like to stay up in the cerebral and chew it over there and really want to understand it. And I think sometimes you got to settle down, like your worth is defined by you just being a sovereign divine being. And you don't have to figure that out. And I think that if that is, you're wrestling with that, the Jupiter-Mars dynamic in the 5th house could be really fun. And really experimental, and really like something I think Aquarians actually really like to do is just kind of play with systems and how different data bits integrate within systems. That could feel very creatively satisfying.
I was thinking about the separation between what's mine and what's ours with Venus in the 8th. And you were talking, Alex, about Pluto in the 1st. I mean, that's important. Like we can't ignore that. So it feels like there's some sort of like self-reclamation that's very, I don't know if hard won is the right word, but you really had to go deep to get it. And of course that's ongoing for a long time, but whatever that feels related to what's happening in the 5th house and what we're creating. And it feels like it's mine, but there's this negotiation happening in the 8th house as well. So I'm curious about how that will play out for Aquarius risings.
Yeah, I see like a creative aspiration forming in the 5th house, like Jupiter, Mars, and it's rooted in the same kind of Aries space of ideas that are probably really exciting for Aquarius. And this is obviously, as Alex was saying, also related to the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius at the end of 2020 that Pluto's sitting on right now. So it's like, I'm trying to change who I am and how I show up. And part of that right now is about implementing some really exciting creative ideas that I want to take off with. But will they make money? You know, am I good enough? Do I have the assets or resources that I need in order to do them? Or is it selfish? Are there other obligations or responsibilities I have? And then Venus in the 8th, you know, who am I indebted or obligated to? What will they think about this? You know, so I feel like creative identity, matters of both identity and creativity are really important. And then it's all about resources and relational dynamics and how they can either support or complicate the excitement that Aquarians are wanting to roll with right now. Yeah, that's how I'm taking that one. Let's move on for our last sign. Pisces. We have the Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo houses in 1, 4, and 7. And when I look at this and I think, well, first of all, like, what is a Saturn in the 1st house period all about? Because that's kind of, I think that's front and center for Pisceans. And I think about that at its best as like, there's periods of time in our life where we all need to recognize what our limits are, what our no's are. You know, like there's so much that we know we can only know ourselves to be when we've reached a no to something that we aren't. You know, so I think Saturn in the 1st is like, it's heavy because sometimes there's a process of feeling disappointed with oneself or incapable, or like you're a failure, or you can't do something, or your body's limited. But it's like accepting those limitations is surprisingly liberating. There's this way in which it frees us up that is really, really profound. So that's a process that's ongoing for Pisceans right now. And it has been since last year. There's some background noise. Someone talking in the background.
Hang on 1 second.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, I thought the mic would cover it up. I got there.
Okay, yeah. No, that's fine. We can still hear it. Alex, can you just mute yourself?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay, great. There we go. So when I look at Jupiter and Mars in the 4th, I think about some really, again, like Jupiter, Mars are very action oriented. There's an excitement to build something or to do something. But in Mercury's sign, while Mercury's retrograde, I could see this about being about what is worth tearing down and doing over, or editing or revising around home, family, living environment. And I think this pinging off from Saturn in the 1st has to do with reaching a limit. It's like, no, I'm not that anymore. And so I've got to change the environment. I've got to change where I live. I've got to move. I've got to redo something. I've got to confront or talk to someone in my family. Maybe even someone you live with, a roommate, or a spouse or a partner. But I think there's an intersection between existential identity issues, finding out what your personal limits are, what your no's are, your boundaries are, and then having to act on them within the space of home, family, and relationships. That's what I see here. But you guys want to fill in any blanks for me? Or what else do you see?
Go ahead, Alex.
I think one of Pisces to me are always on the eternal quest for unification and oneness. And all the I'm just going to go more general with this, but all the Mercury this month, everything being in a Mercury ruled sign, in these squares, except for Saturn, strikes me as the need to choose the winter or the spring, the darkness or the light. There's something here to me about, Saturn in the first house, like you were saying, Adam. I think, asking for, like, in order to get a yes, I need to know. In order to get a, that's just the part of what Saturn asks us to do. But through that choice, we can see with the fourth house particularly, like maybe it's like, I'm realizing I have to let go of an aspect of myself. I have to say no to something that I have been in order to move my home, in some way, or something in that regard. But I think just generally this month, the ask to really work with Mercury can be challenging for Pisces risings, but it can also, like you said, be free. Like, I made a choice. There I go. I'm off to the races in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is more or less what you both have already said, but I'm just really drawn to the fourth house conjunction and this being a new start and how we do things around here, whether that's, within you with the subterranean themes of the fourth house, or with your family. And I think that makes a lot of sense with Venus in the seventh and Saturn in the first. There's some reconfiguring of the dynamics in your home and the people you're closest with that's sort of spurred on by the Saturn in the first, and maybe getting a little more serious about a little more serious or a little more mature or a little more disciplined or boundaried about how you show up.
Yeah. I also feel like, there might be demands or demanding people or situations around home or relationships. And it might be about, what can I say yes to? What can I give to? And where do I have to say no? So I think these are hopefully all different angles that, one of them will be resonant for all of you Pisceans out there. Yeah, this is good stuff. That takes us through all 12 signs. Yay.
We're back.
Yeah. So I am so thankful that you guys are here helping me out with this. I want to plug Alex and Dana. You can find Alex at Alex Amorosi Healing on Instagram, where Alex makes lots of fun content and often does live talks, and has had some of the people that you've seen around here. You guys did a live talk together, didn't you?
We did.
Yeah. So you'll it's a great place to track Alex's work. You can find him at alexamorosi.com as well, where you can book a reading with him and check out all that he has going on. So thankful for you being here and a regular part of the show. I want to promote Dana at Self Help Witch on Instagram. You can follow her and all of her good content, and the Self Help Witch podcast is available through the links there, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then for some reason, I just saw this like 2 seconds ago. I don't have your website link. Can you?
It's just selfhelpwitch.com.
Selfhelpwitch.com. I'm going to put this up on the screen. So selfhelpwitch.com. And I'm assuming on your website, people could book a reading with you if they wanted to, or follow whatever you're up to, or some of the classes and workshops that you offer and stuff like that, right?
That's right. Just briefly, because I'm going back to school, my readings, I do still offer readings, but my availability is very not a lot right now. So if you don't see times that are available, email me and I might have something else, but just an FYI.
Yeah. And I'm sure that your books will have, as we go forward month by month, you may have different availability at different times.
That's right. Right.
Because I know people will want a reading with you, so it's good to let them know that. Thank you both so much. We will be back for At the end of August, you will find us here breaking down the astrology of September. And I have to say that September has a lot going on. We've got a big new moon, a lot of mutable energy again. But we have like one thing that I think most people will be really interested in is going to be the, hold on, let me get back here. It's September 17th that we have a lunar eclipse in Pisces with a conjunction to Neptune. So like that's going to be a big highlight for the month. So we're back into eclipse season again. Mars is going to be debilitated in Cancer. It's an interesting planet to talk about. So lots of good stuff to come in September as well. So we hope you will come back and check that out and hear Alex and Dana and I break it all down for you again in a month. Until then, we hope you guys are all doing really well, and we will see you again next time. Take it easy, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.